Hello guys, Prairie here. Welcome to the channel. On this channel, we make videos around technology tips, career advice, and inspiration, helping you elevate your career, earn more money so you can live a better life. Guys, if you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Please consider subscribing below. So guys, in today's video, we're going to be talking about Snowflake. More specifically, we're going to be looking at 10 beginner settings and tips to look at when working within the Snowflake UI as a beginner. Now, Snowflake is a powerful, elastic cloud data warehouse delivered as a service that can be accessed in the web browser. Once you get into the web browser, what are the settings you should be looking at to set up so your experience in the platform is very smooth? That's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, the very first setting we're going to be looking at today is setting up your role. Setting up your role is a powerful setting because it controls all the experience you have within the platform. The role within Snowflake gives you privileges. It gives you privileges for what to see, what you can access, what queries you can run. So it's very essential when coming into the platform for the very first time to set up your role and make sure the role you're using is what you expect to use. Now we're going to switch over into the demo environment and see how this works. All right guys, so in the Snowflake demo environment, the way we're going to access our role is to look on the top right hand side of the screen. So this shows us our user profile. Now within that, we can click on the drop down, and right there we have an option to switch roles. And there are many different options that you can see here depending on the roles that your admin has given you access to. So for me, I'm currently working with the account admin. If I wanted to, I can switch over to the sysadmin, the public role, security admin, user admin, or whatever role your admin has given you access to. And depending on the role you're using, it's going to drive what you see on the screen. So pay attention to the account that we can see. And the reason why we can see this account icon is because I'm currently working with the account admin role. Now, if I were to go ahead and switch that to another role, that's going to disappear right in front of me. All right, because whatever role I switch to might not have access to see account. Again, if you come into the platform, you don't see things the way you expect to see, or queries are not behaving the way they should, or access is not working the way it should be working, you might want to check on the role to make sure you have the correct role set up. The next thing you want to look at when working within the Snowflake environment is to set up your preferences and your notifications. So everybody has their preferences in the real world, and that translates into the Snowflake UI as well. There are some people who want a lot of notifications. There are some people who don't want notifications. So depending on the preferences you have, you might go into the Snowflake environment and be able to change those preferences to work for you or to work for your organization. Let's dive right in to see that in action. So in the demo environment, to see how to change our preferences, we're going to go back again to our user profile on the top right hand side, and right below the role that we changed, we can see preferences. And if you click on that, this gives us the option to change a lot of the user preferences. Now, you're not going to be able to change a lot of account preferences here, but for your user preferences, you can certainly change a lot of that in here. So the very obvious one is changing your password. If you needed to change your password for whatever reason, we can go ahead and do that right here. You can also set up multi-factor authentication for your account. Now, this might change depending on the requirements for your organization. Some might require you to have this, some might not, but this is where you're going to go in to change that within the Snowflake UI. Now, the next thing beyond just your general preferences is you might want to set up some notifications. And this is really key if you want to be alerted when things are happening within your account. So there are different ways to do that. You can go into the notifications tab here and select all notifications if you want every notifications to come to you. Now, if you want it to come just by web, you can go ahead and select it to show up by web, and that will show up when we click on this icon and we can see our notifications here. Or if you want them to go to your email address, so you can also set it up so it goes directly to your email address. For some people, they might say, well, I don't want any notifications, and you can go ahead and select that. For others, you might want all notifications. I prefer having all notifications. That way, if I miss it from the web, I'm going to get it from the email. All right, so really powerful. Now, a lot of the things we do in Snowflake is going to happen inside of the worksheet. And depending on the context you've set up for your worksheet, you might or might not be able to access certain objects. So let's dive right in to take a look at how this all works. So we're back into the worksheet within the Snowflake UI, and this shows up on the screen. So you can see in here, I have a query. Now, this query is a very basic query. It's going to my sample data, looking at the weather schema to pull in my weather table for the last 14 days. If I were to go ahead and run this query the way we do in Snowflake, and I hit on run for this, what you're going to notice is there is a problem. this query cannot run. And why is it not running? Well, it's because my context hasn't been set yet. So it's very important to set up the context within your Snowflake environment to allow queries to run. And we set up the context right on the screen as we see here. So the very first context you want to set up is your role. And the role right now I'm using is a public role. Now, you might say, well, how different is this role from that role that we set up here before? The difference is this role is going to control just what is within the context of this worksheet, whereas this role is controlling the entire experience of the platform. So right now I'm going to run my query as I can switch this into account admin, and now whatever query I run in here is going to use account admin. If I would set this to public, whatever query I'm running in here is going to use the public role, and that's independent of the role that my user is currently using. Now, the next thing we can set up is our virtual warehouse, and this is where we set that up. We can select our database to know what database we're working with, and then we can select the schema. And it's very important to select at least the database and the schema if your queries are not fully qualified. I'm not going to run into an issue because my query is fully qualified. But if that wasn't the case, then you want to make sure your context here has the database and the schema all set up. Now, I can certainly set all of this up by using the UI. But another way to do it, which is a lot easier for a lot of people, is simply to script it all out. Now, if you come into your screen, the very first thing you might want to do is have some simple commands to set up the context within the environment. So for me, I'm going to set up my account admin role. I'm going to set up my schema, which is going to reference the database. And then I'm also going to set up the virtual warehouse to be used. So in this case, it's going to be using account admin, the weather schema, as well as a compute virtual warehouse. So let's set this all up and see how it looks. All right, so there you go. By running the script, we now have our roles and our context here all set up. And if I were to go back and run my query as such, we're going to see now my query is going to return some data because the properties have been set up correctly. The fourth thing we're going to look at here is being able to set up the size for your virtual warehouse. And this is really key. We know the big differentiation from Snowflake and a lot of other platforms is this whole idea of separating storage from compute. Those two are completely independent, and those two are completely separate. Now, once you have storage and compute separate, you can size up your compute up and down in an elastic fashion without any contention. And it's very important to make sure that when running your queries, the virtual warehouse you're using is the appropriate size for your query. You don't want to oversize it or undersize it and then have performance impact on your query or on the cost you end up paying on the platform. So let's dive in to take a look at how we set this all up. So looking back at the Snowflake environment, we can ensure our queries are running with the appropriate warehouse size. You can do that by visually looking at the warehouse size we have here on the screen, which is currently running as a small. So I can click on that to verify this is running as a small warehouse. Now, if I wanted to size this up or size it down, I can go ahead and do a resize directly from the screen and dynamically change that to an extra large all the way to a 4XL. Now, in as much as we can do it by the UI, I'm a huge fan of doing it by scripting. So right now my virtual warehouse is a medium. I just changed it to a medium, but I can go ahead and run a very simple script. So this query is going to resize my warehouse from the medium we just saw down to a small. And you're going to make this decision what warehouse size to use based on the particular query you're running, the cost factors, as well as the specific SLAs you're going to be meeting. So for me, I want this to run as a small instead of a medium. So I'm just going to go ahead, alter that compute warehouse, change it into a small, and voila, my virtual warehouse now is a small ready for me to use. You always want to make sure your queries are running with the appropriate virtual warehouse sizes. Number 5, the next thing we're going to look at when setting up Snowflake is just to get an idea of searching for the objects that we need to do the job that we want to do. So in Snowflake, you're probably looking at writing queries and doing some interesting analytics. Well, you're not going to be able to do that really well if you don't have the objects you need. So talking about the tables, talking about the databases, talking about the schemas that you need for you to do your job. And the way we're going to do that is to leverage the search functionality to find the objects and the metadata we need to run your queries. So let's go back into the UI to take a look at how this would show up. Now within the UI, we can search for whatever object we want to bring that into our worksheet to run our queries. So for example, I can browse visually here on the right side to look within particular databases and within particular tables. So this one for now has no objects, but if I were to go back and look at the sample data, which I know for sure does contain some objects, I can see there are tables, there are views that are all available within this environment. Now, what if I didn't want to go ahead and visually click through this, right? You can imagine a scenario where your organization has lots and lots of tables and databases and such, all right? And this is where search comes into place. So instead of clicking and browsing for what we need, I might just simply go ahead and leverage the search functionalities within Snowflake. So in this case, let's look for the hourly, and it's narrowed that down into the few objects that have hourly and brought that right in front of me. And if I needed to use this, I can simply go ahead and click on the ellipse to preview the data, to view the details of this particular object, and to use this within my query statement. The next thing we're going to look at here is being able to access sample data within the Snowflake platform. Now, Snowflake is delivered as a service in the cloud, and it comes with a huge sample data set you can use either for practice or to begin building your data analytics pipeline. And this comes from the Snowflake share environment, which is going to be a separate topic in itself. But if you're looking for sample data, you don't have to look far. Snowflake provides an entire sample database right within every Snowflake account. You can use that to practice. Let's dive right into the UI to see how that works. So we're back into the UI. Again, we're going to go back to browse and to find database objects on the left side. As we saw before, we can simply search for objects, or we can visually browse down the tree of objects. And one of the objects that's available within every Snowflake account is a Snowflake sample data. This is really a sample data for you to kickstart your analytic workload, and anyone can use within their Snowflake account. So for me, I'm going to go ahead, click on that to browse down. There are lots and lots of data sets available in here if you're just looking to test, to practice, to build up your skill. Really powerful. So you can go down to weather as an example. There's a lot of weather information. There's a lot of analytics that requires weather data. You can simply use this. Now, if you wanted to use something with the TPCH kind of data sets for benchmarking and for testing, those data sets are available right within Snowflake. You can use this to do your testing, to build report, and just to get very comfortable. So working with sample data is one of the interesting things I would want to test if I'm new to the platform and I'm really looking to get my hands on the keyboard. For point number 7, we're going to take a look at how to upload scripts into the Snowflake environment to use for your analytic workloads. And this might be a situation where you have scripts in other platforms. You might be using your favorite IDE to write your SQL statements, and you want to bring those statements directly into Snowflake without having to retype your scripts all over again. Now, we can do that by simply uploading the scripts into the platform and being able to run that directly. Let's dive into the UI to see how that looks. Now, assuming you have a script sitting, say, somewhere on your desktop, you want to bring that into Snowflake to use it for your queries, you can simply go ahead and open up a new tab or a new worksheet here for us. And I'm going to call this upload. So this is going to be the script we're going to upload to use for the analytics. And what we're going to do here is we're going to click on the little ellipse right here, and this is going to give us the option to load script. So we can simply go ahead and load script. That's one way to do it. The alternate way of doing it is to go to the far right side on the screen here, and we have another option again to load script. So if I wanted to load script, I can simply click on that. It's going to bring me into my desktop environment, and right from there I can go ahead and browse right to the script we need. So I'm going to select my Snowflake SQL script. Once we have that, it comes over to my screen, and voila, the script is ready for me to use. And so if you look at this script, very similar to what we did before, it has the ability for me to set my context, which we can do by script, and I can go ahead and run my select statement against the sample data set, and we can see the result right below. So if you have scripts that are sitting outside of the platform, the SQL scripts, you can use the load script functionality to upload those scripts directly into your Snowflake UI to use it for your analytics. Now, point number 8, we're going to look at the ability to filter column results and even to go beyond to downloading the data sets from your query results onto your local machine for further use. And so Snowflake gives us the ability, if you're running a query statement and there are lots of columns that are coming back it gives us the ability to filter those columns down to a few to make the experience within the UI a lot easy. That said, let's dive back into the UI and take a look. So now we're back into the UI, and what we can see from the query we just ran a few seconds ago is it does return us a couple of columns that we want. All right, so it does have a column V, it does have a column T. As you can imagine, there might be data sets with lots and lots of columns. Now, the best way to preempt that is to use filter within your query statement. So instead of doing a select star, you want to pull in the specific columns that you need. But assuming that even after doing that, you still have a lot of columns that are coming back, you can use the UI to filter for the specific columns and maybe reorder the columns so you can see them differently. And the way we're going to do that is to go into the UI, and right here on the drop down we have columns. From there you can click on that drop down, and now you can decide what column you want to see in the result. It doesn't change what the query brings back, it just simply changes what you visually see here on the result. So for example, if I don't want to see the V column, I can hide that. If I don't want to see the T column, I can hide that, and it makes the UI a lot easier. Now, another alternative way of working with these columns is to go ahead and maximize the result. So if I go ahead and maximize the result, now I can visually see everything in front of me and I can work with that. Again, you can still filter the columns here if you want to. You can go ahead and show back the data set if you want to, minimize that result back if you want, and that experience is a lot more easier. Now, assuming that you have the results that you want and you want to bring that to your local machine, you can go ahead and click on download right here and decide, okay, how do you want to save this data set? Do you want to save it as a TSV or do you want to save it as a CSV? So the TSV is the tab separated values, and the CSV is a comma separated values. So if I wanted a CSV, I can go ahead, select that, and right there it's going to export that to my local machine, and then I can use this in some other report or some other analytics workflow. Another way of doing this is, well, if I just don't want to download data but I want to see a subset of the data within the UI result, you can use the search functionality in here to still further filter the result. I have to caveat in here that a better approach would be to put a where clause in your query statement to do the filter. But assuming that the result came back on the UI and you just want to visually see what's going on, you can still search for the result. And the way we're going to do that here is, if I'm just perusing and browsing through the result, I can see there is a couple of words here. So let's take Sule in here in my result. So I can go ahead and directly search for that term, and it should just show me result with Sule right within that field. So you can use this as an additional way of searching and interacting with the data set that you get from your query result. Point number 9, we're going to dive into the query results we get and see what's happening behind the scenes using the unique query ID that Snowflake provides for every query you execute on the environment, to get an idea of what exactly is happening behind the scenes when we run a query. And if the query is coming from cache, we want to know exactly if the query is coming from cache or if it's actually running and scanning data to give us that result. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to leverage the query ID that each query returns with. Let's dive right in. So we're back into the Snowflake UI. We just ran a couple of queries, and as we can see, we have some results on the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and run this query again. So if I go ahead and run this query again, one other thing you might want to do is to make do not ask, so it doesn't keep asking for this. Now, if I run that query, we see the query has returned some results on the screen. But in addition to the results we get on the screen, we have this hyperlink in here which says query ID, and this is unique for every instance of a query you run. So if I keep rerunning this query, even though my query hasn't changed, even though the statement hasn't changed, it's gonna give me a new query ID. And if I want to use that query ID, I can simply click on that, and you can see the query ID is available for me. I can copy that, or I can further drill down into that particular query ID. Now, once I click on it, it brings me into this new interface or into this new view, and I can see a lot about what's going on my query. So right here is I have the statement that was run, and below here I have the profile of who ran the query. Was it successful or not, how long it took, and a lot of other metadata information for me to use. But what's even more interesting within this profile is this profile tab in here, and this profile tab is unique for every query. So if your query is really complex and you take a look at the profile tab, you're going to see what's happening behind the scenes for that query result to be returned. For me, I just rerun this query a couple of times, and so you see I have just one box here available. Very trivial. All right, and the reason I have just one box is because this query is simply just coming from cache, so there is not a lot of things being shown here, right? So it's just a query result reuse is 100%, so that tells me it's coming from cache. But if your query wasn't coming from cache and you're running a brand new query every time, you might get some really powerful and interesting information in here for you to further use in your analysis. Point number 10 we're going to look at is the ability for you to get help within Snowflake. What we've seen here is a lot of functionalities. We've gone down the list of looking at setting up default roles. We've seen how to set up preferences. We've seen how to set up context within the worksheet. And we've also seen how to resize your virtual warehouse to make sure it's meeting your SLAs and you're not overpaying if you don't have to. We've also seen how to search for objects and metadata within the platform. We saw how to access sample data within the platform. We saw how to upload scripts. We saw how to filter columns and even go down into diving into specific query IDs. Now, there is a lot of other things you can do within the Snowflake platform, which we haven't even begun to cover in this video. And the way you can access that information is basically to get help. Let's dive over into the UI to see what that looks like. Now, if we look on the top ribbon of the screen towards the far right side, we're going to see a help icon. And this is what can bring help to us as we're working within the Snowflake environment. If you click on this icon, it's going to give us links directly into the Snowflake documentation. And this is where you can go in and get the detailed technical documentation on the Snowflake platform, step-by-step guides for you to follow and be successful with the platform. There is also a community available. You can join the community, you can partake, you can post your questions, you can interact and work with other like-minded users of the Snowflake platform. Also, there is a download area where you can download drivers if you're going to need drivers to work on other platforms, ODBC drivers, JDBC drivers. You can access that within this environment, and you can also show the help panel. All right, guys, let's bring this back home. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. What we've done today is compiled a list of 10 beginner settings and tips to look for when working within the Snowflake UI, especially as a beginner. Again, I hope this was helpful to you. I hope you found this valuable. If you did, please consider showing that to us by liking this button, subscribing to the channel, hitting that bell notification so you can get notified about future videos like this. Now, if you have questions about specific topics or specific areas we should cover, don't hesitate to go down into the comment section below and let me know. I'll see what I can do. Again, this was Fru. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.